Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for Employee Engagement, Flawed, Incomplete, and Unfinished, sponsored by Harrison Assessments, and presented by Ann Sandberg, Managing Director of Predict Success, Philip Christman, Founder and President of Avant Performance, Inc., and Andrew Hartland, Managing Director for Foresee People, Technology, and Solutions, partner of Harrison Assessments International. This webcast has been pre-approved for HRCI and SHRM credits. Please be sure to attend the complete webcast in order to receive your credits. If you have any questions today during the presentation, please click on the Q&A tab on your webinar controls and type them in there. We'll be doing our best to answer those. And it's my pleasure now to turn you over to today's presenters.
Thank you, Sylvie. Welcome to our webinar, Employee Engagement, Flawed, Incomplete, and Unfinished. It's a fairly provocative title, granted, but I think at the end of the hour, you'll get a good understanding of why we say that is. Now, I do apologise if there's a bit of background noise. I'm in a hotel in Tokyo, and we were pretty confident there wouldn't be any other people in the business centre at 1 AM in the morning, but there we go, Murphy's Law, we're proven wrong. So let's get into employee engagement. So why are we talking about employee engagement? The issue is we've all spent coming up on 2 decades collecting all this data about employee engagement, and yet we haven't really moved the needle much at all. And we want to try and understand why that is. So Sylvie, the first audience poll, please. And a rather cheeky one, I guess. But should our efforts to increase employee engagement levels actually increase employee engagement levels? That's the purpose, right? While we get those results, we'll go on to our presenters, and yep, surprise, surprise, there's 98% of people agree, and a couple of people who just prefer to dissent and don't think that engagement levels should increase. So I'm going to introduce you to our presenters. We've got Ann Sandberg. Ann is out of Los Angeles. Hello, Ann.
Yes.
Next up, Philip Christman. Christman is out of Georgia.
Yes. Hello, everyone.
Thank you, Philip. And myself, based out of the Gold Coast in Australia, but as I said, currently in Tokyo. A little bit of background about Harrison Assessments. We use predictive analytics to help organisations select, develop, lead, and engage their talent. It was founded in 1990 by Dr. Dan Harrison. We operate in 61 countries and are available in 38 languages globally. So, as I said, it's a fairly provocative title. It's flawed, incomplete, and unfinished when we're talking about employee engagement. And it's a pretty simple reason why. And it's that anonymous group data is ineffective at fostering engagement. As Dan Harrison said, managers can't have meaningful individual conversations that help foster engagement using insights from anonymous group data. So what I want to do is start by going through Gallup's original data and original research. And before I do that, I just want to acknowledge that we all owe a huge debt to the Gallup organisation. Their research that linked motivational efforts to business performance was quite revolutionary. And if we have anything to add at Harrison Assessments, it's only because we're standing on the shoulders of giants. So let's go into this original research, and this is a lot of this information is coming from the great Rick Tate, who unfortunately couldn't be with us this evening. So the original data, the original research was focusing on high-performing managers only. It wasn't a random sample. It wasn't didn't include average or mediocre employees. It was only high performers, and they were asked the question: what needs to be present in an organisation to earn your discretionary effort and what's required to earn your loyalty to an organisation. And it was an open-ended question. It wasn't a survey. And after they got all the data back and analysis, there were 12 factors that were considered strong enough to be reported. And they followed up with a question based on that: who is the #1 influencer for these things to happen? And the clear winner was the leader I report to. That was the most common response by far. So Gallup made this key discovery of this strong relationship between the 12 factors in organisation performance. As I said, absolutely revolutionary. And they went, this is amazing. So let's build a survey for commercial use that would ask employees how they felt about the 12 factors. And of course, that became the Q12. And of course, there's the questions, we've all seen them before. But the problem with this is the survey doesn't recreate the original data, because no one was asked all 12 questions in the original study. It was an open-ended question. Most respondents only listed 1 to 4 factors. Now, the other issue is there's no ranking of which factors are actually important to that individual. The output that is created is generalized group data, which you just can't use to foster individual engagement. And really, for each individual, there's only probably 2 or 3 important factors that need to be addressed in order to help create that engagement for that individual. Now, as the immediate supervisors or managers were identified as the #1 influencers, and we had anonymous group data, engagement scores mistakenly came to be seen as a reflection of good or bad management skills. And this wasn't at all the purpose of the original research. So because of this, and that's really all you can do with anonymous data, is it? You can only try and imply that it's management. And so to avoid any potential repercussions to the employees, the data had to be anonymous. And of course, you can't do much with anonymous data. You can only get broad insights. And the reason this is an issue is because engagement is an individual psychological phenomenon. But we've made it the responsibility of the organisation or managers to try and engage people. Now, when you think about engagement, you think about a time when you engaged. It was usually because you were doing something you enjoyed or something you liked doing, and you felt like you were moving towards a goal. Now, you can't make that happen. You can't do that to someone. They can only do it themselves. It's an individual psychological phenomenon. So, Anne, if you want to jump into unintended consequences.
Absolutely. Thank you, Andrew. So what are the unintended consequences then of relying upon group data if you're designing an engagement approach? Back to unintended consequences. Okay, great. All right, we're back on track. So this leads us to the realization that we can't really rely on group data in order to make assumptions about individuals. So here's a quote by Rick Tate, who's a master trainer for Harrison Assessments and was formerly with Ken Blanchard in situational leadership. He was closely involved with the original Gallup work. So what he's saying here really is that you'll be right about a few people if you use group data to guide your engagement efforts, but mostly not. So really those results are going to be mostly important to the leadership and to HR perhaps, but it rarely impacts the individuals and the managers on the ground level because it's just not individualized. Okay, so here we're talking about what's the impact on individual managers when we take this approach of relying on group data. Well, sometimes actually what can happen is that it becomes almost a punitive effect on the individual manager. So when engagement data has then been collected and disseminated, it's up to the individual managers and supervisors to do something about it. And most often, it's not all good news. If you're a manager or a team leader, you've got pressure on you to do something fast about employee engagement. but what? What are you going to do? Okay, here we're saying this then often can put a misplaced focus on extrinsic factors, meaning we try to think of things that might get people excited about work, and often they're very superficial things. They're extrinsic factors, and they only go so far. Most people have a deeper yearning for other motivators like job challenge or specific learning opportunities, maybe the desire for greater authority, things like that. While other people sometimes are happier with flexibility, work-life balance, because maybe their current circumstances make that a priority for them. Now, that typically changes over time, by the way. So some extrinsic factors can actually be demotivators. So a little story about a client of mine. It was an investment banking firm, and they threw quite a few company parties and dinners and social events for their agents. They ran through an engagement survey, and they found that actually most people really hated going to those events. Most of their agents were in their 30s, had young children, and they were actually demotivated by having to show up at these events where they were being taken away from things that they really cared about. So in that case, meant to be a bonding experience actually becomes a time suck and a demotivator. The other thing that tends to happen just as human beings, we often form our own expectations. In a vacuum, what are you going to rely on? So it's very much human nature to see others as we see ourselves if we can't think of any other way to go about it. So if you have very little to go on, what's the default? Well, I think we impose our own values. So if I'm a person who loves challenge, then I might assume that my direct reports do too. Whereas we know that some people don't want difficult work. They're very happy to keep doing what they're doing for years sometimes, and they may do a very good job. So in a case like that, additional challenge might actually freak them out and be a demotivator, where for someone else it might be a plus. So I think then this is what happens, is that scores from engagement surveys often become the outcome. So often, we find most often that the research shows us that companies who do something about engagement use an annual survey. So, and that takes time, right? You've got to get the survey launched, you've got to get the results back, and then you have to look them over, then you have to disseminate them, and it becomes sort of an annual event or a score, rather than what we're suggesting, which is an individual manager-employee relationship that's focused on communication. So employees also get their expectations raised when an engagement survey is launched and they make their mark, and then they wait for the results. It's often a very passive situation. They're waiting to see what's going to come out of it and what's going to happen. And so they're really not actively involved in their own engagement because they're simply waiting with the expectation that something will happen, and hopefully it'll be something they enjoy and that does motivate them. We know, however, that engagement levels are pretty low right now across the board, and they haven't changed in years. So this approach does not seem to be working that well. Okay, so quick audience poll. Do you recognize any of these unintended consequences that we've been talking about the last few minutes, that these occur in your own organization? And so here we're talking about things like, as we said, demotivators, assuming we know what people want, those kinds of things. So take a quick minute, and if you could, respond to this poll, and let's see what we've got. All right, so that's really good. So that means that people are resonating with this result, that there are unintended consequences that occur when an engagement survey is launched, and that we don't necessarily think are going to happen, but could be negative. All right, thank you very much, everyone, for participating. All right, so let's take a quick look at the state of engagement. We'll get there. There we go. All right, so let's take a quick look here. So how many organizations actually measure engagement actively. So we can see here it's almost a split, a little more do than don't. Andrew, do you want to chime in where this data came from?
Yeah, sure. And this is the latest HR.com state of employee engagement from their state of the industry research.
So we also know that, we know that there are a lot of companies who just aren't doing it. They're not measuring engagement, or maybe they did and now they've stopped because they realized that it actually isn't working in their favor, or they need to take a different approach, or maybe need a different survey, or need something different than what they've been using. Okay, next slide. Okay, so another piece of data from that same study. This has to do with what percentage of the organization's workforce is believed to be engaged, and you can see the data here is all over the map. So, and it's not terribly impressive, right? So we would hope it would be at least 80% or more, and indeed it isn't. It falls somewhere in the middle, which is really pretty poor. The other thing I think is a lot of us believe that our employees are engaged or highly engaged, and the truth is they often aren't, right? It's just like if you ask someone, what kind of are they a good driver? Are they just an average driver? Are they a poor driver? We find study after study says most people consider themselves to be good drivers, and how can that possibly be? It just doesn't add up. All right, so who has responsibility for engagement? Who does this fall to, right? So here we have some different results around, what's our belief about who should be driving engagement initiatives? Well, you can see that top leadership gets a lot of the burden here. So many people believe it's the top leadership's responsibility. On the other hand, how can they know without being very close to individuals within the organization? How can they know what they really want? They can just look at group data, and that doesn't really help them on an individual basis. Same thing with HR, really, right? So HR can help. Of course, HR can help. They can help individual managers, certainly. They can launch engagement activities, but that mostly falls into some of the categories we talked about under unintended consequences, like extrinsic factors, or perhaps development opportunities. We know that some people don't want to go to classes, however, and some people don't want to go to parties, so that's difficult. We can see here there's also quite an onus on the immediate supervisor, which is important, and certainly that's our perspective, is the individual supervisor really needs to be highly involved, but how is of course the million-dollar question. And then we have the employees themselves. We believe that employees have a huge responsibility for their own engagement, and that the relationship between the supervisor and the employee is the most important one, because that's a deep and close, or should be a deep and close relationship where they know each other well, and they have enough to go on to know what's going to matter for that individual person. So how do you measure engagement? There are a lot of ways to do it, right? So I think we've been talking mostly about annual surveys, and certainly this shows that that's the most common method, but there are other ways as well. So you can use exit interviews as people leave the organization, particularly voluntarily, particularly if they're high performers or good performers. We want to know why they're leaving. At that point, however, it is a bit too late, isn't it? But it is a way to collect data, and we're not saying you shouldn't do it. I think you should do it, but it may not be the most proactive way to do it. You can also look at retention rates over time. We know that engagement is intimately connected to retention. The more people are engaged, the longer they're likely to stay with an organization. So those two work hand in hand. The fourth one, one-on-ones with managers, yeah, really important, but look at how mediocre the result is. It's not as high as we think, at least, and we're going to try to influence you to think more about it. Performance management systems also play a role, so you can gather data there. You can gather data in what's called pulse surveys, periodic kind of spur-of-the-moment surveys taking the pulse of the organization. You can use customer satisfaction rates as kind of a KPI, productivity as kind of KPI, and these kinds of things. You can see last on the list, work done outside normal working hours is actually one that is used to see how conscientious an employee might be, which I think is probably not the same as engagement because it can also be kind of fear-driven, so not really a very effective indicator. Okay, so let's look at how people feel about engagement. What's sort of the sentiment around engagement? So here are some results. So engagement is a means to an end. It's not an end unto itself. So we see most people acknowledge that, yeah, that's why we're measuring it, right? It's not we just want to know that everything's okay. We want to know that we have engagement because we want the organization to do better. We want people to stay with us. We want to promote from within and so on. But still, the percentage is not as high as we might expect at only 64%. Secondly, performance drives engagement at least as much as engagement drives performance. Here we have also sort of a mediocre result, but still an important question. Thirdly, it's possible to focus too much on employee engagement as a goal. This is surprising to me. I would think that this would be a lot higher. Engagement really is kind of the buzzword of the day. Everyone's talking about it. It is perhaps one of the most important goals of an organization is to be actively working on employee engagement to improve the performance of the organization and to increase retention. See the fourth one down, engagement and job satisfaction are basically the same. No, we know they really aren't, right? Engagement is putting forth your discretionary effort above and beyond what's required. Job satisfaction might be reliant on things like benefits or salary or, factors that are really not necessarily at all related to engagement. So I think this is a common misperception and one that we need to change. Next one, there's solid evidence linking engagement to performance. There definitely is, and it's all over the internet. So many, many business writers have been writing on this, and I think we know this well. And certainly the people who participated in this survey do as well. The meaning of employee engagement is vague. All right, very interesting here. We have 35%, almost 36% who believe that is a vague notion. It really shouldn't be vague. It really is a concrete thing. It has to do with the individuals giving forth their discretionary effort because they are engaged with their job, with their team, with their organization. So we need to make that clearer, I think, as professionals in this field. And then finally, the question, there are reliable ways of measuring employee engagement. So 81% believe there are reliable ways to measure engagement. Very interesting, considering that the most often the way to do that is through an annual survey. And we found that there are many unintended consequences that are associated with relying on the data that's derived from an annual survey. So we're going to talk about kind of a different twist on that in a few minutes. We're saying here that happiness, if we say, is happiness the same as employee engagement? Well, we're just saying not really. It really isn't the same thing. So we know that many low performers, for example, would be very happy to just do their job at a low level so that they can come to work and see their friends, get stuff done that might be personal stuff, that they may not be supposed to do on company time, and keep getting paid for it. We all joke about the public sector or about the DMV or so on. There are many people who are very happy to just do the bare minimum if they're guaranteed a paycheck. So this is saying, we must never lose sight that employee engagement is about individual and organizational performance. It's a process. It's not an outcome. I think the other lesson is, we really can't try to make another person happy. just like you can't do in your real life. I mean, this is sort of a maxim for many relationships that are deep relationships, like family or like marriage. We try to make other people happy, but in the end, it's an individual proposition. It's a unique proposition that is really up to the individual. We cannot make somebody be one way or another. All right, so let's just summarize what we've been saying about this traditional approach of launching annual surveys around employee engagement. So we found that we've talked about the fact that often what we get is generalized data that is very difficult to apply at an individual level. Secondly, that we don't really know what the ranking is of what factors are important to the individual, and often it's more than one thing, right? You might want challenge, and you might also want flexible work time. And so both might be important, but one might have an edge over the other, whereas somebody else might have something completely different. So we really want to know what that ranking is. Thirdly, the manager's influence on engagement, it mistakenly comes to be viewed as a responsibility. This is part of my job, is to engage these people. I'm not quite sure how to do it, but I know that I'm going to be measured on it, and so I'm a little bit scared of it. And it's like throwing darts at a dartboard. I'm just kind of trying, but I'm not really sure what I should be doing. As a result, data had to be anonymous. So, this is back to the group data level. It's just not actionable when it comes to individuals and their individual needs. All right, thank you.
And Philip, would you like to talk about Harrison's approach in the evolution?
Absolutely, be my pleasure. Okay. So our concepts of engagement, as it's been said already, I'd like to dig a little deeper into that it is an individual psychological experience. And it's a combination of how well an individual fits the position they're in, the job they're in, and how fulfilled they believe their important expectations to be are being fulfilled. So engagement, retention, performance, all of it really does begin with selection, as we all know. And so the better job we can do understanding the individual's fit for the specific role is critical. And that's really where Dr. Harrison's realization of what we're putting forth on our philosophy on engagement came from, in testing millions of people around the world in 61 countries using our assessment, which, rather than looking at the person from, say, a personality, style, or type point of view, which is pretty typical in the assessment world, we look at the individual. We try to understand what the individual enjoys doing and what the individual does not enjoy, and therefore will avoid, and then build a job formula so we can compare the person against that position and understand how much they will enjoy that position. So that's step one. And looking at all that data over the years, it's obviously very clear that people who fit their role and enjoy what they're doing tend to be more engaged and more successful and perform at a higher level. But in addition to that, Anne kind of touched on it, is the idea of expectations. We all have expectations in our life, professionally and personally. And so what we want to do to engage people, to build trust and understanding, think about it at the line manager or direct manager level in particular, with direct reports. The more that we can understand a person's expectations and within their role and for their career, and show them that we understand those expectations, we're now building understanding. And that is the crucial point to get, because the more you think about yourselves, the more that you feel understood by someone, anyone in your life, the more you probably trust that person and believe that that person has your best interest in mind. So that's what we want to seek to do. And it is a shared responsibility. Most all of the current engagement surveys are really kind of a one-way street, whereas we said earlier, the onus is all put on the direct line manager and more largely on the organization to try to create engagement, or even maybe to try to make someone happy in their role. And that's a one-way street, and it doesn't work. It does need to be a two-way street and a shared responsibility between the employer and the employee, because people have to be responsible for their own lives. And so, therefore, fundamentally, what we're saying is that it's a relationship issue. And so we want to certainly, as I just said, understand what each individual employee's expectations are, what they want. We also want to show them how that needs to live within our mission, vision, culture, and job performance expectations. Yeah, so here we're talking about how do we build a basis to have conversations between the employer and the employee. We need a model that we can do that and that will allow us to have a clear conversation, because conversations with people about their expectations and our expectations are what will build mutual benefit and mutual success over time. And of course, we want it to be forward-looking. What does each person want for their life and their career path into the future? How can we help them? How can we show them that we understand that and that we are working together with them to help them achieve that, even if that means moving on to another organization at some point? Based in reality. Well, have any of you ever dealt with an employee who had unrealistic expectations? Probably not, but I have seen it happen. A little bit of humor. People can get caught up in their head and have their own ideas about how things should be, and to be able to bring the conversation back to the fact that it's a two-way street and that it's a mutual relationship, should be a mutually beneficial relationship. We can base it in reality and context about what is needed for both parties. And of course, based on an exchange or the idea of communication, as we said earlier. So what are the three variables for each individual? Important expectations. We want to ask the individual to rank the factors that are important to them. And so what do? Well, we have a questionnaire that asks the person to rank these factors on a 0 to 10 scale. And we're able to see for each individual which expectations are most important to them. And for the ones that are important, that are moderately high to high scores, that's where we will focus. We don't put any effort in the areas that they don't consider important, because the one size fits all, where we talked earlier about we're measuring all 12 factors. It's interesting that most people only have 2 to 3, maybe 4 factors that are really important to them. So taking it to the individual level and understanding what each person wants and is most important to them is what we need to do to be able to truly engage people. So we ask each individual to rate their current level of fulfillment on the factors that are important. And that is on a 0 to 10 scale as well, which shows up as a percentage. It's really a 0 to 100, because it'll show up as 70%, 80%, 75% fulfilled. And this is extremely useful. In fact, I just looked at one earlier this morning for a lady in HR who is, I'm going to do some work with her and her manager. She's feeling quite unfulfilled in 3 key areas to her. And so we're going to work with her to help her try to support herself in some areas where she could do more on her side of the equation to help her achieve her own goals, and as well bring some awareness to her manager what he can do to help her with her expectations. So that is the mutual beneficial path that we seek to help people achieve. And she was 50%, 60% unfulfilled. Well, fulfilled, which I would say is 30 to 40%, 50% unfulfilled in some areas. And that's significant. So a conversation is needed. If there's a high expectation that is not being fulfilled, this is both a risk factor for turnover and an opportunity to have great conversation that leads to engagement, of course. And it's not necessarily a reflection on the manager at all. The manager may be doing a great job. The person may be upset with strategy, direction, change happening in the organization, change in the team. The person may, again, as I said earlier, have some unrealistic expectations as well. Without a conversation where we can be specific about certain factors for the individual, we can't know at the individual level where the problem is arising and therefore how to address it correctly. Supporting behaviors. Does the individual possess the behavioral traits that are likely to support their important expectations? I've touched on this a little bit. It's going back to my earlier conversation about it being a two-way street. Yes, we very much want to know what the individual's important expectations are for their position and their career. We also want to look at what the individual is doing to support themselves in that area. For instance, just last week, I was looking at a report with one of my clients and has a direct report who is expressing dissatisfaction in their pay level and wants more pay raises. But we look at their motivation scores, in particular takes initiative, and it's a low score. So it was a very insightful and powerful conversation to help the employee understand that it is that two-way street and that we need that person to identify actions and goals and take the initiative to step forward and accomplish task in their role. So it ended up being a very powerful performance management conversation that brought awareness to the employee, and we were able to kind of right the ship. So that's critical, and actually got quite a lot of those kinds of examples in different areas of expectations. And so the perfect, here are the different expectation areas that we measure. So development, remuneration, authority, social, appreciation, communication, personal expectations, work-life balance. And within each of those factors, you can see the dark blue is the expectation for the individual. So wants development in the first one, that person ranked that at a 9.0 importance. And here's an example where they are saying they're 80% fulfilled in that area. Well, underneath the wants development, you can see the two traits that would support that and would support that individual in achieving those things and moving themselves towards achieving fulfillment in that area. That's enthusiastic, which is in our system is specifically about having clear goals, and self-improvement, which is desire to better oneself, try to grow, develop, etc. So, you know, this individual, I would say there's a little bit of an opportunity for this person to take more interest in and deeper work in self-improvement. And because this could be a case, for instance, where the manager of the organization is providing some development opportunities, but this person is kind of lukewarm on it, not really jumping into it at a deeper level. So that's an example. You know, a couple of more. If you look down at authority expectations, wants autonomy 9.6, critical for this person, meaning this person wants independence from authority. 9.6 with a fulfillment of only 40%. Takes initiative score is really good. I talked about that trait a minute ago. And so this person will tend to take a lot of initiative, meaning to look and see what needs to be done and take action on their own to do it. The person does have a low tolerance of structure placed on them by other people, and that may be creating a little bit of a disconnect for them, and it'd be worthy of some conversation. So I won't go through all of these, but you can see that we're covering the key areas that are critical, and we're able to show, to have the conversation and show the individual employee what they said is most important to them, what their fulfillment level is, and what they are doing to help themselves achieve that as well, along with us. And that engenders a very healthy conversation. So the individual has expectations that may or may not be fulfilled. The organization has expectations about the individual's behavior and performance that may or may not be met. This is real communication and exchange. There is a real relationship built on understanding the individual's dreams and goals and what is needed to achieve them. That truly is our philosophy and what we are trying to help organizations achieve. And it may seem like a daunting task because it may take so much time to get to know someone, but in reality, I actually am having this conversation using the report you just saw with candidates. We're beginning the engagement conversation with candidates, which is actually turning out to be quite useful in attracting people and shows them that we really care and want to understand them. So progress is what engages, and discussion is the first step of progress. Again, it's all about communication. We all know this, and communication is what makes relationships work or not work. And it's also what causes a lot of problems because people are unclear often about what's important to them or what's important to the people that report to them. And so having a way to understand that, to look at it together on a piece of objective report on a piece of paper and discuss it is what really creates momentum in building engagement and trust and understanding. So first break all the rules, of course, talks about everyone wanting a manager who sits down and talks to them about their individual issues with a future focus. And we believe that this model will allow you to do that virtually instantaneously. Audience poll. So would it improve engagement if managers had a tool that could help them explore and discuss each employee's expectations? There we go. Wonderful. So yes, it would help. And that's the kind of results I was hoping to see. To summarize, we do it at the individual cycle. It's an individual psychological experience, and we need to do it at the individual level rather than the group level. It is a shared responsibility between the employer and employee, not just the employer and the manager. Want to identify the individual's important expectations, supporting behaviors to achieve those expectations, and their current level of fulfillment. In order to have a future-focused conversation based on mutual benefit and realistic exchange. So that's a summary of our approach from a philosophical point of view about how we truly engage people and the practical model of how we produce that report, data and reports. And by the way, that report that I showed you was at the individual level. We can run it for groups as well, which is good for dialogue and looking at how different groups and or teams in the organization may be feeling engaged or not engaged, which gives us some clues to other things that may be going on. But from there, we would take it down to the individual level as well. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Philip. That's great. Thanks, Anne. So at this point, we'd like to open it up to Q&A. So if anyone has any questions, we'd love to answer them. In the meantime, of course, if anyone is interested in knowing more about our approach to employee engagement, you can, of course, visit us on our website at harrisonassessments.com and read some more about what we do.
Okay, we do have some questions here. If you'd like me to read them out for you, I'd be happy to do that.
Yes, please.
Okay, the first question is from Jane, and she's asking, it's interesting that the top leadership percentage is higher than HR and immediate supervisor is higher than HR. Is there any particular insight as to why the differentiation? Is it possible that perhaps a disconnect between the top leadership and HR? If direction is from top down, seems like HR would be more in alignment with top leadership.
Anne, you want to take the lead on that one?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. I think there is a disconnect, and I think that they should be in greater alignment. I think what it does show, I mean, if we make assumptions about what that's all about, I think alignment is a big issue. How do we see this? What are our priorities? Who's responsible? And I think there's almost, some negativity or finger pointing around that sometimes. It's not me, it's the individual manager. Nope, it's HR. No, it's top leadership. It's we don't have a strategy that's concerted, we all are pulling in the same direction. It's very fragmented, and I think that lack of alignment is a huge issue.
And I'll tag on to that. I hate to make a bad joke, but this may be a way to help us in human resources engage senior management more by showing them
and educate.
Exactly, and educate and showing them, and I've got some projects like that going on now. We're just starting, and when they understand that, of course, the strong link between engagement and performance, then I think there would be a lot of support for it at that point.
Great. The next question is from Elaine. Is there any way to get the actual questions that are on the surveys? It would be interesting to see how to set up these types of documents related to what is important and what our employees fulfilled.
Well, I'll take that one, Ann. I think perhaps the best way to do that would be to just experience the questionnaire yourself and take it. And because there's really two questionnaires that will happen. There's the initial Harrison Assessments questionnaire that measures all the traits, because remember, we show the supporting traits that the person has to help them fulfill their own expectations. Well, we have to get a score on those traits, which would include questioning them about their important expectations. That all happens in about 20 minutes. And then there's a fulfillment questionnaire that we can follow up with, or it can be done at the same time. It takes about 2 minutes, literally at most, where you go into your most important expectations and you rate it. And that can, by the way, I'll just take this opportunity to say that can be done as many times as you like. So in certain situations, we have people like every 90 days redoing the fulfillment questionnaire. So we'd be happy to let anyone who wants to experience that. And Andrew, you can, I assume, make that known how that can happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Just go to the website and submit an inquiry letting me know that mentioning hr.com, and we'll be very happy to show you through the process.
Yeah,
harrisonassessmentsplural.com.
Okay, next question from Pamela. We've got a few questions here, so let's keep rolling. How do you keep the meetings from becoming therapy sessions?
Well, I'll take the first shot at it. That's a great question. Personally, they kind of go that way sometimes because so many people are seeking to be heard and to be understood and have real communication. And it's incumbent upon whoever is delivering the data to be direct and clear and build it in the context that we want to engage you, and we want to engage you because we want your best performance. That's what creates a win-win for us. And I think if you can maintain that context, you can steer it and keep it pretty clear. And where the individual is low in their own supporting traits for where they have a high expectation, that is an important conversation to have with them about the reality of their position and what needs to be done. And so when you keep it when you keep the context of performance in the conversation, I think it helps you avoid that. Anne, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, can I add on to that? I think what you did see when Philip showed you just the overview page with with just those few scores, there are supporting pages that go into depth into each of the areas. So for example, the development expectations first box has its own full page of narrative around how to have that conversation with the person. So it's pretty easy to keep it on track and prevent it from becoming a therapy session. And you could see the one that Philip put up there, that person's whole issue was around authority. Clearly, they want more authority. And so that conversation would be very targeted. It wouldn't go into, they wouldn't spend a whole lot of time on some of the other areas because they weren't problematic. For that person, it was, how can I have more responsibility? How can I use my autonomy? And so that would be a very targeted conversation between the manager and the person saying, okay, here's what I have. Here's what's possible over the next period of time. How does that sound? Or it could be, I don't really have anything like that right now, but let's look to the future. So the conversations really kind of run themselves through the support of the report to focus on what's most important to that person. And rarely, by the way, is it personal stuff. It generally is around development, recognition, traditional areas, challenge, those kinds of things.
That's right. And it's a two-way process. It is really based on exchange. Okay, you want this? All right, well, this is what you're going to need to do in order to get it. Or indeed, the conversation could be, yeah, I agree, you've been doing that, you've been doing great. Let's see how we can make it happen for you.
Okay, I can see we're not going to make it to all the questions. We have about 2 minutes left here. There is one question here, and the answer will have to be kind of short. There are 3 questions that were sort of similar. So Colin and Abdullah, I'm rolling yours into Victoria's question of, how does Harrison recommend employees, managers handle issues or misaligned expectations at the organizational level? Example, if the employee has concerns about leadership decisions or direction of the organization.
Yeah, I think that is a very important question, and I think the more you open up dialogue, the more potential there is for that kind of deeper look at where are we going. Tell me more about our mission, or tell me what's the strategy. I think it empowers the manager to then be that conduit between their own manager and senior management and employees. So, I mean, it begs the question, you're right. It is, sometimes you will find some very meaningful, gaps in how we're communicating what we're all about, what our strategy is, what our direction is. But boy, it's better to talk about it than not.
Yes, and I'll add, when we do conduct the fulfillment survey for groups, we can even do it for the whole organization. And yes, the group report will be anonymous. That doesn't mean that we can't draw some trend from the metadata, and then we are able to, in our model, take it down to the individual level, and that is how you would affect organizational change. Understanding the trends, having conversations by group, by individual. And
we recommend you do both. We think group trend information, it is really important in terms of strategy and major efforts, but the individual is it's not one thing or the other. Both are really important.
And on behalf of HR.com, thank you very much to our panelists today and to Harrison Assessments for this very informative webcast. As you know, to the audience, you will be able to view the recording from our archives, and you will be getting an email with your credit information, and that will also be placed in your HR.com account. Your feedback is important, so please do take a moment to fill in the evaluation survey that pops up on your screen. And this concludes our webcast. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Have a great day.